the bourgeois conception of bourgeois society, the Eurocommunists try to paint a distorted picture of the present-day capitalist society and its contradictions, to present it as a society which has evolved so greatly since the time of Marx, Engels, Lenin and Stalin that their fundamental analyses and teachings about it are out of date and no longer valid. They see present-day capitalist society as unified and no longer distinguish its polarization into proletarians and bourgeois, no longer see the contradiction between these two classes as the fundamental contradiction, and consequently do not see the class struggle as the main motive force of this society. For the Eurocommunists, of course, there are certain contradictions, which they call contradictions of development, of progress, of well-being, of democracy, etc., which have allegedly replaced the old contradictions, especially the contradiction between labor and capital, on which the whole Marxist-Leninist theory about the role and the historic mission of the proletariat, the revolution, the dictatorship of the proletariat and socialism is based. Today, they say, the proletariat of the time of Marx and Lenin no longer exists, the classes have changed and they are no longer those which Marx and Lenin knew and about which they spoke. Nowadays, say the Eurocommunists, even the bourgeois class has dissolved as a class, has been transformed into workers, and all the wealth has been gathered in the hands of a small clique of capitalists who preserve and defend this property. Marches, for example, has discovered that in France today the bourgeoisie that counts has been reduced to only 25 financial and industrial groups, while the others are workers. Consequently, stress the revisionist renegades, the present-day bourgeois capitalist state has changed, because society itself has changed and the classes have changed. Therefore, they reason, Marx and Lenin, who did not know the present-day capitalist state, which is entirely different from that of their time, foresaw another role for the proletariat, which differs from that of the present day, another method for the seizure of power by the proletariat, another method of struggle to go over to socialism. For the Eurocommunist revisionists, all the classes and strata of capitalist society today, and especially the intelligentsia, have been identified with the proletariat. With the exception of a small handful of capitalists, in their eyes all the others, without distinction, want to change society from a bourgeois society into a socialist society. And in order to carry out this change, according to the Eurocommunists, the old society has to be reformed and not overthrown. Hence, they imagine that state power must be taken gradually, through reforms, through the development of culture, and through the close collaboration of all classes without exception, both those who hold and those who do not hold this power. All the revisionists follow the course of Marx, who when he speaks about the American proletariat, tries to prove that in the highly industrialized American society, a proletariat in the Marxist sense does not exist, because, according to him, this proletariat now allegedly belongs to history. To Marx, Gurodi, Berlinger, Carrillo, Marches, and their company, this means that the consumer society, developed industrial society, has not only changed the form of the old capitalist society, but has also leveled out the classes, and as Georges Marches in particular has declared, now we can no longer talk about the French proletariat, but about the French working class. Marx said that our proletarian is economically none other than the wage laborer who produces and increases capital, and is thrown out on the streets as soon as he is superfluous for the needs of aggrandizement of Monsieur Capital. What has changed in France that Marches can no longer see proletarians? Are there no longer wage laborers who produce surplus value and increase capital? Are there no longer unemployed whom Monsieur Capital has thrown out on the streets as unwanted? In socialist Albania, certainly, the proletariat no longer exists in the sense that this notion has in the capitalist countries, because in our country the working class has the state power in its hands, is the owner of the chief means of production, is not oppressed or exploited, and works freely for itself and for the socialist society. The matter is quite different in the capitalist countries, where the working class is deprived of the means of production and, in order to live, is obliged to sell its labor power and submit to capitalist exploitation, which is continuously increasing its intensity. Besides being savagely oppressed and exploited to the bone, the proletariat in those countries also suffers the oppression of the bourgeois army and police. Although the proletariat in the capitalist states may be dressed in the nylon materials which the consumer society produces, in fact it remains the proletariat. It is not without purpose that the modern revisionists change the name of the proletariat. If one speaks of the proletariat, which in capitalism possesses nothing but the strength of its arms, it is self-evident that this proletariat has to fight its exploiters and oppressors. It is precisely this struggle, which has the objective of destroying the old state power of capital to its foundations, that terrifies the bourgeoisie, and precisely in this context the revisionists assist the bourgeoisie with all the means they possess. The denial of the existence of the proletariat as a class in itself, as the most advanced class of society, charged by history with the glorious mission of eliminating the exploitation of man by man and building the new, truly free, equal, just and humane society, is nothing new. The various opportunists were preaching it at the time when Marxism was emerging as a philosophic doctrine and a political movement. Marx and Engels refuted these views and gave the proletariat weapons and arguments to fight not only these, but also the other lackeys of the bourgeoisie, the future apologists of capitalism, such as the modern revisionists today. One of the greatest merits of Marxism is that it saw in the proletariat not just an oppressed and exploited class, but the most progressive and revolutionary class of the time, the class which history had charged with the mission of the gravedigger of capitalism. Marx and Engels explained that this mission stems from the socio-economic conditions themselves, from the place which the proletariat occupies and the role which it plays in the process of production and socio-political life, from the fact that it is the bearer of the new relations of the future socialist society, that it has its own scientific ideology which illuminates its way as its own leading staff, the Communist Party. Despite the changes which have occurred in the development of the economy and the social composition of capitalist society, the overall conditions of the existence, the work and the life of the proletariat today remain those which Marx analyzed. No other class or social stratum can replace the proletariat as the main and leading force of the revolutionary processes for the progressive transformation of society. The teachings of Marx on this question remain unshaken. In the Marxist theory, the proletariat finds its own spiritual weapon, just as this theory finds its material weapon in the proletariat. Marx said that the proletariat is the heart of the revolution, while philosophy is its head. Marx's Capital is the beacon light for the world proletariat, which shows it scientifically in what manner and in what forms the bourgeoisie exploits it. The capitalists chain the proletariat to the factories and machines, but capital teaches the proletariat how to break these chains. The revisionist theses about the change in the nature of the proletariat and its historic mission have long existed in the communist parties of the Western countries, but the first to come out with them publicly and officially was Roger Gurodi. Gurodi was one of the first revisionist theoreticians to develop the theory that one could no longer talk about the impoverishment of the French proletariat and that the various classes and strata of the population were already moving towards blending and unification. The thesis of Gurodi, now repeated and applied by the other revisionists, is that in the present situation, there is no longer any need for violent revolution, because the workers are gradually sharing actively in the profits of the big capitalist enterprises, which now are no longer run by the bourgeois owners, but by the technicians who have replaced them. This is a great fraud, because these technicians and specialists are under the thumb of a single management. They are the servants of the big capitalist trusts and monopolies, which are the real owners of the means of production. In the capitalist world, despite the changes which have taken place in the social class structure, nothing has altered in regard to the positions of classes and class relationships. The theory of Marx, Engels, Lenin and Stalin about classes and the class struggle in bourgeois society retains its full freshness and validity. A series of other theories similar to that of Gurodi emerged in the West from both the new French pseudo-philosophers and from their German, American, Italian and other counterparts. All these theories carry the brand of revisionism, Trotskyism, anarchism and social democracy. The moment arrived when all these theories became completely the private property of the French, Italian, Spanish, British and other revisionist parties, which gathered up all this revisionist and opportunist refuse and codified it in a banal way. Daily life, the struggle of the working class, has exposed these theories and continues to do so. It has revealed their reactionary counter-revolutionary aim. It proves that the working class is impoverished the more the capitalists are enriched, that it properly understands what Marx said, that the more wealth each worker produces the poorer he becomes, that the more commodities the worker makes the more he reduces his own value as a commodity, that the proletariat cannot escape from exploitation without taking over the means of production and without destroying the state power of the bourgeoisie. Today, the modern revisionists such as Marches, Berlinger, Carrillo and Company, reject this scientific view of Marx. Today, they say, the process of the relative and absolute impoverishment of the proletariat no longer exists because of the development of the technical scientific revolution and the gains which the workers have achieved through reforms. They want to tell the proletarians that all their demands and needs are being fulfilled from the handouts which capitalism gives them, therefore they have no reason to rise in revolution. Some other revisionist theoreticians, faced with the undeniable facts of life, declare that it is true that Marx spoke about the exploitation of the working class, but what he said is equally valid for both the capitalist and the socialist countries. Consequently, the working class has no reason to rise against capitalist exploitation because allegedly it can never escape it. This is a distortion of the reality and a slander. The position of the working class in capitalism and its position in socialism are diametrically opposite. In the capitalist and revisionist countries the worker is not free, either in work or in life. He is a slave to the machine, to the capitalist and the technocrat, who squeeze out the last drop of his labor power and from this create surplus value for capital. Only in the genuine socialist order, in which the working class is in power, do the teachings of Marx, properly applied, provide the possibility for the proletariat to become conscious and completely the master of the means of production and, through its dictatorship, to gain all its political, economic and democratic freedoms and rights. The binding of the working class with economic chains, with which capitalism shackles it, is the main thing in bourgeois society. The whole capitalist system has been built on this bondage. However, the bourgeois and revisionist theoreticians, being quite unable to deny this great truth, try to obscure the question of economic exploitation about which Marx speaks and which is primary, and to interpret it through a series of concocted theses and false views. Being unable to refute the binding of the worker to capital, these theoreticians preach that allegedly there is no longer any need to point out how much the owner in the capitalist order squeezes and enslaves men, but what should be pointed out is that his link with capital is allegedly in favor of the worker because it keeps him alive. Their aim is to divert the proletariat from the class struggle against capitalism by trying to focus its attention on the blessings of the consumer society. The modern revisionists have invented many deceptive theses to divert attention from economic oppression and exploitation. They give great publicity to their thesis that in the consumer society the worker enjoys so many things that he regards the economic problems as coming at the bottom of the list. According to them, almost his only worries are the problems of religion, the family, his wife, his TV set, his car, etc., and as a result the problem of economic exploitation is allegedly no longer the basic problem of the class struggle and revolution. However, they do all these things in order to water down the wine and divert the working masses from the struggle to overthrow the bourgeois order. In breaking with Marxism-Leninism and wanting to create a new theory which is distinct from the doctrine of Marx and Lenin on all fundamental questions, the Eurocommunists have got themselves into a great mess and confusion, into profound incoherence and great contradictions. They are practically unable to explain any contradictions of the present-day capitalist world or to give answers to the problems which arise from them. True, they speak about such phenomena as crisis, unemployment, the degradation and degeneration of bourgeois society, but they content themselves with general observations which no one, not even the bourgeoisie, denies. However, they consciously try to cover up the cause of these phenomena, the savage capitalist exploitation, and to avoid showing that this exploitation can be eliminated only through the revolution, with the overthrow of all the old relations which keep the system of capitalist oppression on its feet. With their theses about the dying out of the class struggle as a consequence of the essential changes which capitalist society has allegedly undergone because of the development of the forces of production, the technical scientific revolution, the restructuring of capitalism, etc. With their preaching of the need to establish extensive class collaboration, because now allegedly it is not only the working class and working masses who are interested in socialism, but also nearly all the strata of the bourgeoisie, except for a tiny group of monopolists. With their claim that the transition to socialism can be made through reforms, because present-day capitalist society is allegedly developing on the road of peaceful integration into socialism, etc. The Eurocommunists have identified themselves, not only in theory, but also in their practical activity, with old European social democracy and have amalgamated with it in a single counter-revolutionary current in the service of the bourgeoisie. Their stand towards the working class and its leading role has been the touchstone for all revolutionaries at all times. Abandonment of the hegemony of the proletariat in the revolutionary movement, pointed out Lenin, is the most vulgar form of reformism. But this vulgarity does not worry the Italian revisionists. Indeed, they proclaim their reformism so bombastically that they make themselves truly ludicrous. The leading role of the working class in the process of leaving capitalism behind and building socialism, they declare, can and must be achieved through collaboration and agreement between different parties and currents which aspire to socialism, and within the framework of the democratic system in which all constitutional parties enjoy full right, even those who do not want the socialist transformation of society and oppose it, of course, while always respecting the democratic constitutional rules. This original Marxist vision, and the supporters of Berlinger, is not a new discovery, but the development of the thinking of Labriola and Togliatti. In this case, they themselves admit the source of their ideas. However, it shall be added that Labriola, whom they are now making a classic, was not a consistent Marxist. He remained far removed from the revolutionary activity and problems of the revolution. As for Togliatti, his work already shows that he was a deviator and an opportunist. By referring to Labriola or Togliatti, the Italian revisionists and their counterparts in France or Spain want to leave in oblivion Lenin's theory about the necessity for the hegemony of the proletariat in the revolution and the construction of socialism. In all his work of genius, Lenin defended and developed Marx's theory about the hegemony of the proletariat in the revolution, abandoned by the European Social Democrats. The social democratic views on this question have been now revived by the revisionists. He proved that in the new conditions of imperialism, the hegemony of the proletariat is essential not only for the socialist revolution, but also for the democratic revolution. He explained that the establishment of this hegemony is essential because the proletariat is interested more than any other social class in the complete triumph of the revolution, in carrying it through to the end. With the theory of Lenin, the proletariat has gone into the revolution and has won, while with the theories that the revisionists preach, it remains oppressed by the bourgeoisie. The Leninist theory about the undivided hegemony of the working class has found a brilliant confirmation and application in the carrying out of the revolution and the triumph of socialism in Albania, too. To the Albanian communists it was clear from the start that only one party, the Communist Party, could lead the national liberation war through to complete victory, that only one class, the working class, could be the leader in this struggle, that the main ally of this class would be the poor and middle peasantry, that the youth and the students would be the main support of the party and, together with the Albanian women, would comprise the fighting strata of the people's revolution. The small number of the working class in Albania did not hinder it in the least from playing its hegemonic role, because it had at the head its Communist Party, which was guided by the teachings of Marx, Engels, Lenin and Stalin. The correct line of our party, which responded to the situation and the interests of the broad working masses, made it possible to achieve the great unity of the people around the working class in a single front under the sole and undivided leadership of the Communist Party. The correct line and leadership of our party led to the extension of the struggle, which gradually built up until it assumed the form of a general uprising, a broad people's armed struggle, up to the liberation of Albania and the establishment of the people's power. In negating the hegemonic and leading role of the working class in the revolution and the construction of socialism, the Eurocommunists could not but abandon also the role and mission of the Communist Party, as it is defined by Marxism-Leninism and as it has been confirmed by the long history of the world revolutionary and communist movement. The theses of the 15th Congress of the Italian Communist Party say that now a new party has been built. What is this new party? The Italian Communist Party, says its constitution, organizes the workers, the working people, the intellectuals and the citizens who fight within the framework of the Republican Constitution for the consolidation and development of the anti-fascist democratic regime, for the socialist rejuvenation of society, for the independence of the peoples, for the reduction of tension and for peace, for cooperation among all nations. The Constitution continues. The Italian Communist Party is open to all citizens of 18 years of age, who, irrespective of race, philosophical views and religious belief, accept the political program and undertake to act to carry it out by militating in one of the organizations of the party. We quoted this long clause of the Constitution of the Italian Revisionist Party, which is almost identical with those of the French and Spanish revisionist parties, in order to show how far the Eurocommunist revisionists have departed from the concepts of the Leninist party and how closely they have approached the models of socialist and social democratic parties. They speak about a new party, wanting it to be distinct from the party of the Leninist type, but in fact their party, which they call new, is an old party of the type of the parties of the Second International, against which Lenin fought and on the ruins of which he built the Bolshevik party, which became an example and a model for all other genuine communist parties. The statement placed at the beginning of the Constitution, that anyone, irrespective of his philosophical views and religious belief, can enter the party, requires no comment to prove that the philosophy of Marx is alien to this party, that its eclecticism is blatant, that the line of compromises of every kind is part of its strategy, let alone its tactics, that the Italian Communist Party is a liberal social democratic party, with its line, policy and stands determined by the changing political circumstances. Its liberal policy ensures that at times it will get votes, but not that it will take and hold power. It makes the bourgeoisie praise it, and the priests in the churches and the monks in the monasteries sympathize with it. Lenin's fundamental idea about the party is that it must be a conscious vanguard detachment of the working class, a Marxist detachment of it. The role of vanguard fighters, Lenin said, can be fulfilled only by a party that is guided by the most advanced theory. Lenin, this revolutionary vanguard theory, a reliable guide to victory, is Marxism. Not only have the revisionists abandoned the fundamental condition for a communist party to be such, that is, acceptance of Marxism, but they permit all the bourgeois, opportunist, reactionary or fascist philosophical views to coexist in their party, and this they have sanctioned in their constitution. The thing that characterizes, that distinguishes the communist parties, is Marxism-Leninism, the sole ideology by which they are guided and to which they loyally adhere in all their activity. Without Marxism-Leninism there cannot be a communist party. The genuine communist parties are parties to carry out the revolution and build socialism, while the so-called Italian, French and Spanish communist parties and others of this type are parties of bourgeois reforms. The former are parties for the overthrow of the bourgeois order and the construction of the new world, the latter are parties for the defense of the capitalist order and the preservation of the old world. At the time when Lenin was fighting against the opportunists for the construction of the Bolshevik party, he said, "Give us an organization of revolutionaries, and we will overturn Russia." Lenin he built such a party and led the Russian working class to the glorious victory of the October Revolution. But where do Berlinger's revisionists want to lead the Italian working class? We must fight within the framework of the Republican Constitution, they say. And the bourgeoisie says, fight as much as you like within the bars of the cage of my Constitution, because this does me no harm. The bourgeoisie maintains the army, the police, the courts, etc., to defend its constitution, laws and institutions. Lined up beside them now is the revisionist party, which is struggling to keep the working class oppressed and enslaved, to corrupt it ideologically and confuse it politically. It has transformed itself into an institution of the bourgeois state to extinguish the revolutionary spirit of the working class, to obscure the socialist perspective, to prevent it from understanding the miserable condition in which it is living and from rising in resolute struggle to overthrow the bourgeoisie.